Hey, everybody, welcome back to Two Legs, a Paul McCartney podcast. This is episode 206. This is the only weekly Paul McCartney podcast where you can get your fix of Paul, solo, Beatles, whatever. We're talking about Paul. And as you can see, we've got some guests here. But first, I want to introduce you to my partner in crime. He's my backwards traveler. He is the other leg. He's Andy Nichols. Andy, my friend, what is going on?
Hi, partner. Doing okay. Fighting off some medical
Okay.
issues again. It's like the winter and spring of my discontent, is to borrow a
Uh,
January 1969 term, but it's not, hasn't been fun this spring.
okay.
But doing okay and really, really excited to be here for 206 to, for the first time, be on here with somebody who I've been listening to for a long time as well. And I'll let you introduce him next.
Yeah, he's this man is a legend. I mean, he's been around for a while. I mean, he's been around the Fest for Beatle fans pretty much since the beginning. He's been working on Beatlefan Magazine pretty much since the beginning. He was a co-host on Things We Said Today. And don't forget about his book, Changing Times, 101 Days That Shaped a Generation. He is Al Sussman. Al, thank you. And how are you doing? And welcome back.
Good, guys. Thanks very much for inviting me.
You got it. And then last but definitely not least, we brought in the young whippersnapper here, and you know him from the show Fans on the Run. You know him from the Fest for Beatle fans as well. He's been a mainstay there for the last couple of years, right? You've been going there every single one, and Ethan Alexanian. It's we love you. You've done many great thumbnails for us in the past, and welcome back to the show, buddy. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, and then today we're gonna do something a little something different that we haven't done before, and we got four generations of fans here. We got the boomers, we got the Gen X, we got the millennial, and we got the what are you Gen Z there, Ethan?
Gen Z.
Yeah, Gen
Correct.
Z, and we're gonna discuss or what are we gonna call this? The U.S. versus the U.K. Rubber Soul.
Mm-hmm.
Here we're gonna talk about the history of the U.S. albums, why they're different. But first, Andy, you've got a little two leg swag on your shirt there. Talk about that, and then let people know how they can get that if they want.
Yeah, well, we have a brand new batch of two legs buttons right here, and we got them in a few days ago, and they are available. If you'd like one, send us an email at twolegspodcast@gmail.com, and we'll sort out the details and get one over to you. But they're nice and kind of taking some inspiration from Talk More Talk and the nice swag that Kit gives out. And now we have some too, and the shirts too as well, which we're kind of taking new orders on them because we are all out of the ones that we did have at the fest. So a couple people have reached out to us about new sizes, and we're gonna, when we get about another 10 or so, then we'll do another run. So stay tuned for those as well. And thanks to those who bought and supported those.
Right, very good. Now a little bit of news today, being what Tuesday? What's the date? Tuesday the 9th. Just we got this upcoming release, and this is Dolly Parton. Ever since she got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame last year, she's talked about doing a rock record, and now we just got some details, and we just found out that Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr are going to be on her cover of Let It Be. So who knows if Paul's going to share vocals with that with Dolly, but Dolly is an icon, and she's got so many guests on here, including Steve Perry, Sting. You've got Peter Frampton on here. You got Joan Jett, and and others, Debbie Harry. So are you guys into things like this, or I mean, are you curious to see what Paul's going to be doing? On Paul and Ringo are
Oh,
going to doing on a cover of Let It Be. Al?
absolutely. Like you say, Dolly is an absolute icon. She's a legend, and
Right.
she probably should have been elected to the hall long before last year. and but it's
Right.
nice to see that she's doing a pop record, say, and so I'm definitely looking forward to this.
Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
I'll give it a good listen. Absolutely. Anytime
Okay.
that we're getting any kind of activity recorded between Beatles, it's got to be something we check out and
That too,
listen to it.
sure.
It's I feel like we're entering a period here where a lot of musical icons have we've lost in the last few weeks and months. So anytime we can get anything from Paul and Ringo, it's going to be a blessing on a recording. So yeah, well, let's absolutely check it out.
Cool. Ethan, Dolly Parton fan over there, or
Not particularly, but I'll give it a listen.
okay. Yeah, I'm just curious to see if Paul's gonna help on vocals with this cover. If it's just gonna be Paul and Ringo just playing bass and drums, and let Dolly take all the vocals herself. So I'll be curious to hear it, but whether or not I buy it, I mean, I don't know if I'll buy it or not. But I'm sure it'll be up on YouTube, and we can all listen to it there or streaming. However, everybody listens to their free music, if you will.
Yeah.
Anyway, but yeah. But like I said, let's get to the meat and potatoes of the show, because being in this Beatle circle and for a while now, I know so many people like Al, that grew up with the U.S. albums, and Andy, you'll talk about growing up with the U.S. albums as well, and then Ethan and I will too. But there's another generation that may have started in the '80s, late '80s, that didn't have the U.S. albums, unless they handed it down. But for me, starting to buy the stuff in '87, as the CDs were coming out, it was just like, yeah, exactly, the '87, '88 CDs, and then it's the UK only. The US stuff pretty much goes, obsolete, unless you're at a used record store and you find them that way. But Al, as someone that was listening to pretty much right off the bat, '64, you talked about seeing them on the Ed Sullivan Show last time you were on. Talk about that early experience, and the fact that you probably had no idea that there, and on the other side of the pond, these albums were totally different.
Well, we did to some extent, only because of the fact that radio stations, top 40 radio, uh, they just could not get enough Beatles material. And so
Hmm.
when there were differences in the track lists of the British albums and of course the various different US configurations and all that, if there were any differences, most of the big top 40 stations, WABC in New York or WLS in Chicago or KHJ in LA, would try to at all costs to get a copy of the record that had that particular
Hmm.
track or those tracks. And that certainly was the case with Rubber Soul, because I can remember
Okay.
in early December of '65, um, one of the two New York top 40 stations were able to get a copy of the UK album and played all four of the different
Right.
tracks. And of course, that lasted for about, I don't know, about 12 hours or so, until Nat Weiss sent out the requisite cease and desist letter, and then that was it until February, when the Nowhere Man single came out. But
Okay.
also, it's interesting, kind of the people who kind of listened. I don't know if this was the case with you guys. I don't know if you were kind of introduced to the albums, to the UK albums, in chronological order, or if you skipped around. But obviously, in '65, we didn't know about the fact that the Help soundtrack album
Hmm.
was only half of the album that had
Right.
been released in England, and so the kind of the shock, if you will, of the musical leap between the side of Help that we got and Rubber Soul was pretty was was really interesting. But for instance, when Beatle 6 came out in June, I remember
Mm.
hearing "Tell Me What You See," which was, of course, one of the tracks that would be on side 2 of the British Help album, and thinking, "Wow, that's interesting. That's different from, it's not your typical Beatles sound, if you will." Um, it was different. So we were getting like little clues here and there.
Mm. Okay. Interesting. Andy, your father was a Beatle fan. And
Is
then now, yeah, he still
is
is.
still.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you've become a fan like a lot of people, your age or younger or older. I mean, you became a fan by, you know, relatives or friends introducing you to the Beatles, and then I think let's say most of the time it was the U.S. Beatles that they got introduced to, right?
Without a doubt, it was what I was exposed to. It was the mid '80s, like around '86, '87, when the CDs first came out. I was too young for CDs. I was only like 4 or 5, so I didn't really. All I had was his records to go by. So the U.S. Capitol, Rubber Soul was my first exposure to it. But I have that unique perspective because that was my first exposure to it. But I was also young enough for the CD generation, so I very early on. I was like, wow, there's a different version here to get used to. So I didn't get so so close to the first one, the U.S. one, where I was like, oh, this is the only one that I know. Which some fans, some first generation fans, will just go by that and that's it. I really have great appreciation for both because I was so
Mm.
young enough to get to hear it on vinyl, and then in the early '90s, I think in the early '90s is when I picked this up, so I got it, and can appreciate them for both for what they are. Yeah, so it's a little bit different.
Yeah, Ethan, I mean, you as well. I mean, you've got older relatives, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the Canadian albums almost pretty much mirrored the U.S. albums, correct?
At first, they didn't,
Okay.
but by the time something new came out in
Mm.
'64, the Canadians were bullied into stepping in line with the American releases. So
Mm.
from something new onwards, we got the American
Yeah.
configurations, with the exception of Let It Be.
Okay. Okay. And then you were introduced to the U.S. and both pretty much at the same time.
Yeah. So I think the first way I listened to it was, and just for the record, I'm not condoning piracy here. My dad, when I first got into the Beatles, he bestowed upon me a thumb drive of
Mm.
illicitly obtained 2009 remasters, and so that's how I really got used to hearing the music. Although, with the earlier Beatles stuff, with Beatles 65 and before, I got to know him through the first volume of the Capitol albums box, because we
Mm.
just had that on our computer. And
Okay.
then also the first copy of Rubber Soul I owned was the American or Canadian version of the record. So that's how I
Okay.
first heard it on vinyl.
Okay. Yeah. Growing up in Michigan, my parents were Motown junkies. They could care less about the Beatles. I mean, my mom and dad told me, I mean, they remember, watching them, on Ed Sullivan and just thinking it was like, give me the Temptations or the Four Tops, So I didn't really have the U.S. albums, from my parents because they didn't buy them, and then by the time that I became a fan, the U.S. were pretty much obsolete with the UK CDs. Now this is it. I mean, this is what they wanted and how they, how these albums were supposed to be. So then that, on the CD, that's what released. Also cassette as well. I think I think I've said this before, but I think the only US album I ever really remember seeing back in the late '80s, early '90s was the Hey Jude album. I don't know why that was. Maybe because it was just, wasn't related to any other, UK album, right? It's pretty much its own thing. Just a collection of stuff that wasn't on any
Capitol
other
album.
Yeah, it was Capitol. But didn't it have an apple?
Yeah,
Yeah, it didn't have the apple on the
sure.
on the label.
absolutely. And some of those Apple
Oh.
labels say the Beatles again on them. They
Oh.
don't say Hey Jude. Some of them say the Beatles again, which is what it was
Yeah.
originally released as.
Originally called,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. So slowly, into the '90s, and that's when I realized that, there were U.S. albums, and you showed that box set, Andy, a couple minutes ago. Yeah. I mean, and I'm just like, look, I'm looking, I'm looking at the track listing, right, and I'm just like, you gotta be kidding me! What? Only 12 songs. This, what do you mean? And Help's got all these weird different things,
Yep.
on it, and it's not the Help that I was introduced to, but it was just it was different. It was just something I couldn't get used to, just because I had spent the last 6-7 years with the UK stuff. So I mean, it was very foreign to me. So, but Al, why were we getting different copy? Why were we getting different track listings in the U.S. here, and not what they originally wanted over in the UK?
The main thing was that the British albums customarily had 14 tracks,
Right.
whereas the American albums customarily had 12, because I believe the royalty, if I'm remembering correctly, the royalties were distributed differently. And and plus, also in England, there was a tendency among a lot of especially the major artists, not to put their singles on the albums, so that you would have 14 fresh tracks. Now they didn't, of course they didn't have the same philosophy toward those albums that the Beatles did. A lot of those early '60s British LPs were, maybe there might be one hit single on there, and then 10 pieces of junk, or 13 pieces of junk. But that was it's a royalty situation. That was the reason why, and but that also gave Capitol the sort of the license, if you will, to start cranking out these compilation albums, things like the Beatles' second album and Something New, and Beatles 6 and Yesterday and Today.
I mean,
because if you held back two from every album, and then you take A and B sides, there's your other American album, because that's how they did it.
Yeah,
the knockout.
There's your Yesterday and Today
album. They knocked out 6 albums in '64 alone. I mean, that's crazy. That's crazy to think.
Right.
And I have to say that the UK. This is where the UK, you might say that they did right by the fans by not putting a single on the album. They gave you value for money. They gave you 14 tracks, and that was it. And the single was separately, and that was the way to do it. That's generally how they did it. They wanted to take care of their fans. If you couldn't afford the LP, you bought the single. That was it.
Right. Obviously something like A Hard Day's Night or Help, you had to put the title song on there.
Right.
But in most cases, they usually tried not to put a single on the album until, I guess, Yellow Submarine and Eleanor Rigby.
Now, wasn't there also a UA album? Wasn't a Hard Day's Night or Help on a
Yeah, Hard
UA?
Day's Night.
Hard
Yeah,
Day's
but
Night is, yeah.
right, that was
So
the official soundtrack.
then there was the 7 albums then in '64, including that, right? Because you wouldn't include that in the Capitol records then, right?
Well, not then, but now it's in the U.S. albums in the blue
Okay.
box.
Yes.
It's
Okay.
on that now.
Okay.
So I guess Capital EMI has claimed ownership of that, but it was a UA because when this run first came out, it was not included in this.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Interesting.
Capitol did have the rights to issue the U.S. version or the United Artists version of A Hard Day's Night since I believe like 1979, 1980.
Yeah, I was gonna say early because you've seen early '80s pressings on Capitol of the UA
Yeah.
cover. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's true.
Interesting.
Yeah, because I know it was
Very
sometime in the '70s that the Capitol absorbed Liberty and UA.
That's also around the time where you kind of saw Let It Be added back into the Beatles albums in print.
Okay.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Al, can you kind of take us back then, set the scene a little bit in '65? I mean, what were you hearing a lot of? I mean, talk about the folk. I mean, there was the folk, and then there was also folk rock. I mean, talk about that era. Psychedelia. Well, I mean, was it really? I mean, was maybe just creeping in with Rubber Soul.
Just
Talk
a
about
little,
Yeah.
just a little tiny bit, but see, I'm not real objective when it comes to 1965 because I consider that to be the single greatest year in the history of rock and roll. And it was a year of really a great change. Early in the year you have the Beach Boys releasing an album called The Beach Boys Today that had on side 1 it had a lot of their their relatively current hits.
Side 2's better.
Yeah. And it had on there some of the musically some of what Brian Wilson was beginning to experiment with, which and then more so on Summer Days and Summer Nights, the next studio album, and all of that set the stage for Pet Sounds the next year. Dylan released Bringing It All Back Home, which was half acoustic and half electric. The next album was Highway 61 Revisited, which had like a Rolling Stone, and that was the beginning of what came to be called folk rock. And you've got the first the Love and Spoonful's first album. You've got the Byrds, who in the opinion of a lot of people invented folk rock. With Mr. Tambourine Man and their version of All I Really Want to Do, and then Turn Turn Turn. And there was so much else. It was also, it was maybe the peak, although probably '66 you'd have to go with as the peak of the golden age soul music. So it was, it was an incredible time. Plus you had the kind of the American answer to the British invasion, with all of these new bands that were beginning to emerge. So it was an incredible year. And yet even with all of that though, the Beatles were still on. In fact, the Beatles were probably never again as popular as they were, say, in the summer of '65. That was, I think that's. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I mean, with the British invasion too was going on, right? I mean, the Stones were becoming a force to reckon with. Ethan, what were some of the other? Go ahead, Al. Finish.
Oh no, just we mentioned the Stones. They had what in many quarters was the #1 record of the year in Satisfaction. It had taken them a year really to really kind of climb the mountain It took them a longer time than it took, say, the Dave Clark Five or Herman's Hermits and some of the other bands. But
Right.
but they got by mid '65, later in the year, they were
Right.
absolutely the number two band in the world. Although it
Mm.
was there was a big difference between number one
Hmm.
and number two.
Right. Right. Ethan, talk about a few of the other British invasion bands that were coming on strong, hot on the heels of the Beatles.
Well, by 65, I think it's fair to say, or when I think of the British invasion, I kind of think of it in waves. So the first
Mm.
wave, which was very, very Mersey beat. So you had Billy J. Kramer, you had Jerry and the Pacemakers, Freddie and the Dreamers, the Honeycombs, and then the Dave Clark Five. But by 65, you had groups like the Kinks, who were starting to have some success in America, the Yardbirds,
Mm.
and even groups like the Pretty Things.
Mm.
Okay.
Even the Who early, they didn't
Yeah,
break America then.
yeah,
Yeah,
the Who
absolutely.
indeed.
Okay. Cool. So we get the Rubber Soul. Now, a lot of these albums, we could, probably do other shows on these other albums, with the
Sure.
Beatles and Meet the Beatles, right? And then you got and all those the Hard Day's Night from there and here. We could, but I think it's really Rubber Soul to me is the one that really starts to stand out. Um, it's a completely different feel. Andy, let's just talk about this for a second. You're discovering both albums, right? And were you used to one or the other at this point in time, or what were you listening to more, you think, at that time?
I mean, in terms of the UK or US,
Yeah, yeah,
uh, it's so tough because these track listings are programmed as like there's DNA, right? So like they just
right.
run off your head from UK, whether it's Drive My Car, Norwegian Wood, You Won't See Me, or US, I've Just Seen a Face. It really depends on your mood, I think, of what you want to hear, which is kind of how I listen to it now. If I'm in a folkier kind of mood, I'm going to put on the US one because I think that mood that Al so greatly talked about, that's setting the stage there in '65, this US album continues that trend with that
Okay,
opening track. I firmly
right.
believe that. I think with I've Just Seen a Face, and I think so what was I listening to? Probably more than the US, but as I've matured, more the UK. But I will tell you that I think that's what Brian Wilson heard the American Rubber Soul, not the
Mhm.
UK. That is
Right.
what drove. That's what inspired him to go create Pet Sounds. In part of, and kind of Al said, he was already on that wavelength with Side Two of Beach Boys Today, which is a great record. Kiss Me
Right.
Baby and old tracks like that are just he was going in that direction anyway. So
Mhm.
the U.S. Rubber Soul just continued and opened up the door for him to do that. So that's why, as you say, Tom, this one has to be the one that you talk about that way because it is so it's polarizing and inspiring, and it's reached so many other people. Then, I mean, we're not going to talk about the U.S. Revolver because we know that
Right.
is clearly inferior.
Right, right. Al, talk about the anticipation for this album. I mean, you had a big album with Help. You had the movie, and then Beatlemania is taking off, full throttle, and then the anticipation for Rubber Soul. I mean, were they playing? Was there any lead up? What were singles at the time leading up? Was it leading up to Rubber Soul, or was it just the album Rubber Soul? Because again, I mean, I'm kind of naive to the U.S. releases, if you will.
No, as a matter of fact, we can work it out in Day Tripper and Rubber Soul were released on the same day in
Hmm.
early, I think December
December
4th
3rd,
of
oh, 3rd or
3rd
4th. Yeah.
Hmm.
of 65, and
Right.
then the single before that had been the U.S. single before that had been Yesterday,
Hmm.
which of course changed the whole ball game as far as the kind of the attitude that the establishment, the adult world had toward had toward the Beatles.
Right.
It was,
Right.
it was, so there was, and plus also, again, as I was saying before, we didn't, we didn't have side two of Help here, of the British Help album here, except for the couple of tracks that were on Beatle 6. So we didn't really know at that point that they were really changing and evolving. There were little clues, like, especially John Lennon's kind of Dylan influenced tracks, like, I'm a Loser on Beatles 65, and of course you've got Hide Your Love Away on Help, things like that. But we really weren't prepared for a change as big as there was with Rubber Soul. Being, in fact, I remember playing it for some friends after I had gotten a copy when it first came out, and their reaction was not great. It didn't. They were used to what they considered to be, kind of, the real Beatles, which was, more pop, Mersey beat,
Right.
Lots of harmonies, things like that.
Right.
And they didn't really, they weren't really ready for this. What's a sitar?
Do you think that would have changed if Drive My Car was the lead-off track?
No,
No?
I don't
Okay.
think so. And there's one myth that have to to smash, and that's this thing that I think that some people have said, was that the fact that I've Just Seen a Face and It's Only Love were put on, the leading off the two sides, was definitely a clue that Capitol was trying to make this a folk rock album, which is nonsense, because
that's
the people
bollocks.
that were, oh, exactly, because the people that were running the music business in those days, were basically, they were like 50-something cigar chomping, businessmen who, they wouldn't know folk rock if it hit them in the face.
No.
I wouldn't say Dave Dexter Jr. really had his ear to the ground when it comes to pop
Exactly.
music. Or his
Exactly.
replacement, whose names escape me.
Bill Miller, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, these were jazz guys. They were into jazz, or the classic vocalists at Capitol, Sinatra, Nat Cole, and Peggy Lee, and people like that. They were not into rock and roll, so there was no way that they were going to deliberately change the track listing to make it sound more folk rock.
Okay.
That's
Now,
silly.
right. Now, the UK and the US, they were released at the same time, or right around at the same time?
Within a couple of days.
I know the
Within a couple
UK
of
date
days.
is December 3rd, 1965, so the US has
Right.
got to be within a few days.
So what I mean
like
is
the next
all the
day, I
tracks
think.
that were, what I mean is all the tracks that were, on the UK, they were ready. I mean, they could have appeared on the US. Whereas the those 64 albums, they were playing catch up. Right? I mean, they had all these tunes because they didn't release a US album until 64. So you've got countless singles, and B-sides, and then a couple albums. So they're playing catch up at this point in time.
Sure. But the one of the reasons why those 4 tracks were not on the U.S. Rubber Soul, besides that whole royalty thing we were talking about before, the other reason was that Nowhere Man and What Goes On had already been designated to be the next single, because in those days it was the singles that were the
Right.
what's the phrase I'm thinking of, the really was the pivot point rather than the album. That would change with Sgt. Pepper, but that was still another year and a half down the road.
The money was in the
so
singles.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So
All
they
right.
so though at least two of those songs had already been designated, and then the two others, were, I think they were already looking toward a, what like became Yesterday and Today.
Right. Yeah, because here it is. They already toured America at this point in time, right? So they wouldn't have played anything from Rubber Soul anyway. And then plus, then you talk about Nowhere Man getting pushed to was it 66 in the U.S. because it goes on
In
Yesterday and Today,
February,
right? Right. So and
right?
then they end up playing it during the 66 tour.
Hmm.
Correct?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yep.
but let's talk about the four tracks that are removed from the UK, and you're looking at Drive My Car, Nowhere Man, which you mentioned, Al, What Goes On, and If I Needed Someone. And I gotta tell you, if you're so making a so-called folk rock album, this is like the no-brainer that why wasn't this one on the album.
Yep.
Maybe you think for yourself off, which is a more hard edged song.
Hmm.
Ethan, I mean, what do you think about these four tracks that are removed? I mean, were the right tracks that were removed, and what are your thoughts?
Well, you took the words right out of my mouth because I
Mm,
was going to say whatever the opposite of a stroke of genius was removing If I Needed Someone from the folk rock album. Because, hey, if you want a folk rock album in the time of the Byrds,
mm,
then don't take away the song that was influenced by the Byrds. That was like the
yeah,
Beatles' attempt at doing their own version of
Yeah.
the Byrds.
right.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
great harmony.
especially since, yeah, especially since George owned up to the fact that he even had written to, as he was still called, Jim McGuinn, and said that the hook that I'm going to be using in this song I've taken from, I think, what was it, the Bells of Rimney, and I forget
Yes.
there was another track. I forget there was another track on the Mr. Tambourine Man album
Chimes
that
of
Mm,
Freedom?
it may have been Chimes of Freedom. I think it
mm,
was. Yeah. So he
And
even, he owned up to it. So yeah, exactly. That would be if they were going to do have a folk rock album, uh, you know, not
mm.
putting If I Needed Someone on there was not not a good move.
it's interesting to note too with that. So a song like that gets elbowed, right, off the American, but then you've got a track like Wait. Now, Wait's a great track. In My Life Ends, and it goes right into Wait. However, if you've read your Lewison talks about Wait. The Beatles were in a rush to get Rubber Soul finished. They were under the gun, and Wait was a leftover from the Help era, according to Lewison in the recording
Hmm.
sessions book. So when you listen to Wait in the context of the rest of the album, it's a little bit different than of the vibe of the rest of the album. So you could have scrapped Wait. You could have put If I Needed Someone on the American one, and you could have elbowed Wait.
Hmm.
When you think about that,
Hmm.
interesting because it was a left. They were scrambling to finish the album. I do remember that reading that in Lewison's
Right.
recording sessions.
Mm. Hmm. Interesting. Now let's talk about the songs that Capitol did add to the Rubber Soul album, and that's I've Just Seen a Face, and it's Only Love. And like Al, like you said, both of those tracks open each side, and it gives starting out with I've Just Seen a Face, which yeah, kind of folksy maybe, maybe a little bit, but to open the album with it, I'm still getting a little used to it as I've listened to the album now 4 or 5 times. What are your thoughts, Al, on I've Just Seen a Face opening this US version?
I think it was perfect.
Mm,
It's strange that a track like that, which was kind of quote unquote relegated to side, to the second side of the British Help album, was an absolutely perfect fit to open Rubber Soul. No
Hmm.
doubt about it. And actually, I kind of think it's a better opener than Drive My Car. Drive My
Yeah,
Car is a
see,
great track.
yeah, because I think sometimes Drive My Car gets poo-pooed on a little bit. Especially fans of the U.S. album, and Al. I mean, you said you got to listen to those tracks on the radio, right? At that during that time, someone DJ was able
Well,
to get the
once
right,
before
right.
they were pulled off.
Okay, okay.
Because I probably
Andy,
didn't hear
right.
I probably didn't
Go
hear
ahead.
Drive My Car a second time until yesterday and
Yesterday and
today.
today. Yeah.
Today. Okay. Yeah, Andy. Opening with I've just seen a face. You're a
Oh,
fan.
oh, 1,000. I totally agree with Al. Perfect album. Perfect album opener, and it is why the mood of the American Rubber Soul, and I think the lovers of the album feel the way they do because it's such a perfectly opening song. It's got the perfect acoustic. You look at the album cover, you hear those chords open up, you know that the mood has been set. And you don't feel that. I don't feel that way when I hear Drive My Car. I just don't. I don't dislike Drive My Car, but I've just seen a face as an album opener comparing it to the middle of side 2 of the UK Help. No brainer.
Yeah, I mean, I understand it's a different feel. However, that's wasn't really the intention, right? I mean, putting I've just seen face here in the U.S. I mean, it gave the U.S. album a completely different feel, right? I mean, you look. Go ahead.
No, you're 1,000% right. And with age and time, I can now say that the UK Rubber Soul is the stronger album. It just is, and I can state that. But just for guilty pleasure reasons and listening to it as a piece of music, it sounds good. I know the stronger album is the UK album. I think everybody knows that. But listening to it in context, and especially like Al, who was there at the time and bought the album, and listened to it,
Right.
he feels the same way that I'm sure many people do.
Okay. Ethan.
So I'm a little conflicted when it comes to I've just seen a face opening the record, as for me personally, I heard the UK Help first before I heard the American Rubber Soul. So I was kind of used to knowing that song from the second half of Help, which actually, now that I'm on the subject of the second half of Help, I know famously George Harrison called Revolver and Rubber Soul parts 1 and 2, but I've always found the UK Help and the UK Rubber Soul to feel more like parts 1 and part 2.
No,
And
interesting. Okay.
I mean, it's a good opening for the American album, but I'm not sure I can forgive taking away Drive My Car, because to me that's a near perfect opener for
Okay.
a Beatle record.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it is kind of really, Andy. When I got to Jersey, and then we played the album, going to the fest. I mean, I was really blown away on how, uh, damn it, I've just seen a face felt as an opener. I really love that acoustic, the opening to that track. I mean, it's a song that I've always loved, but still in the back of my mind, I'm going, this is really weird, but it flows. I mean, that whole first side for me flows. I mean, when you talk about I've just seen a face going into Norwegian Wood, I think that's a great 1-2 punch. You know,
1, 2, 3 punch.
well, yeah, you
Yeah,
won't see me. Yeah.
but you
However,
won't see me.
I think think for yourself is might be kind of the thumb, that kind of sticks out a little bit. But even the word too, I mean, doesn't necessarily fit, in my opinion. But then it ending with Michelle, I think is a nice touch. Um, Side 2. Now this is the one where, now listen, I love It's Only Love. I adore that song, but I don't think it has any place on this album. I think it's a different feel on the second side, and whereas I think if I needed
Mm.
someone, I think would have been a stronger maybe
Imagine that if
side
happened.
two.
Opened up side two of the American.
Yeah,
Wow, that would have been a hell of an opener.
right. But Al, it's only love. I mean, talk about that opening side two.
Well, I think it works because you're talking about a song that's on the same side within my life, and
Hmm.
right there you're talking about two of the greatest love songs that John ever wrote, at
Okay,
least to me.
fair. Right. Yeah. Ethan.
Again, I feel a little conflicted because "It's Only Love" is one of my favorite Beatles songs. I think it's, possibly, it's definitely the highlight of side two of Help for me.
Hmm.
And I think it's perfect as an opener to a side. However, it's it's a little. I would rather it have been the opener for side two of the British Help than opening side two of the American Rubber Soul. Because again, I feel like it feels slightly out of place.
Okay. Okay. Andy.
I could say with hindsight, it does slightly feel out of place now, having known the album so well, both versions and their incarnations. But at the time, I would love hearing that. Oh, it's only love opening, and but I do think it is slightly out of place on the American Rubber Soul, just a little bit, in terms of the flow. That's probably the one
Okay.
song where I would probably have to just agree where it just does fit better on the UK help.
Okay. We talked a little about if I needed someone. The other three tracks, Drive My Car, Nowhere Man, What Goes On. Al, I mean, could you see any of those three songs on this US album, or do you think, the songs that were presented to you at that time? I mean, do you think, it worked, or I mean, now, learning the UK albums later on, what were your feelings between the two once you discovered the UK version?
Well, obviously, and I think Ethan mentioned this before, that you could, if you trade it off, think for yourself, for
Mm,
if I needed someone, I think that would have fit perfectly.
right.
No
Yeah, yeah, I
question,
agree.
no question about it.
Right. I agree. Um, Andy, I mean, because then what? I mean, the funny thing is all the songs that we done from '65, you know, that we didn't get until '66, that you guys didn't get till '66 with Yesterday and Today. I mean, Yesterday was a track that you guys didn't get until Yesterday and Today, right? In
Well,
'66.
it was a single.
Well, yeah. Yesterday it
It had
had
already been
already
a
been a
single.
single,
I'm
and
gonna be a single.
yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. Gotcha. Gotcha. So, Andy, growing up, then you spent many years with the two albums.
Yeah,
Okay. Moment of truth here. You want to hear Rubber Soul right now? Are you playing the U.S. or are you playing the U.K.?
probably the UK.
Okay.
Just because at the end of the day, that's the album that the Beatles made, and that's the way that they programmed it, and the way that they wanted it made and presented, and at the end of the day, it has their stamp on it, and it's the way they wanted it to be made and heard and appreciated. There's all variations of Beatle albums all over the world in all different formats and markets, but at the end of the day, that's their record and that's what they made. For selfish reasons, I might listen to Rubber Soul for a little bit, but right now, tomorrow, I'd put the UK one on. I would.
Okay. Ethan?
Um, can I just say something before I forget?
Yeah,
Because
please.
we didn't really touch on Nowhere Man too much.
Well, we're gonna
Um,
get to Nowhere Man in a minute. Yeah,
Mhm.
okay,
but go ahead.
well, I'll save my piece on Nowhere Man now. Again, I think it was, if they were really trying to do a folk rock album, I think it was quite a mistake leaving off Nowhere Man, because
Mm,
lyrically it's one of the more, I think it might be the folkiest song lyric wise on the record, and
Yeah.
it's one of the Beatles' strongest songs.
Good point.
I agree.
Absolutely.
Al. I mean, we talk about Nowhere Man. In fact, that it was a single, right? But I mean, that wasn't until '66.
Right.
I want to know. I want to know with you, Al. When do you recall? Because your group, I mean, your first generation fans, right? You're listening to all these US albums first, and to you this is what it is. I mean, it's it's etched upon your brain, right? I mean, you know what's coming. You know what's coming after the word. You know what's Michelle. I mean, you probably know this album backwards and forwards and back again. So getting the UK album, I mean, how does that mess with your mind? I mean, do you still feel like the US? I don't know why shouldn't say still, but I mean, how do you feel about the difference between the US and the UK and your listening habits? I mean, would do you prefer the US over the UK?
Well, of course, I can. In this day and age of Spotify and all, you can cheat, and you can
Oh,
go onto
absolutely.
Spotify and make a super Rubber Soul album by just tacking on the
Right,
four other, make a playlist and tack on the four other songs.
right. Well, yeah, they
So
would
I
have
would
fit.
so I
Yeah, there was plenty of room.
yeah, yeah, oh yeah, easily. Of course,
Yeah,
with playlists, they're infinite time wise. So
right.
it doesn't matter. So I would probably cheat in that respect. But otherwise, if I had to choose, that's tough.
Yeah,
It
That's
is.
very
It really
it
is.
yeah. It
right.
I probably didn't listen to the in context the UK Rubber Soul until really probably the early '70s when when
Hmm,
imports became more
right.
available, because in those
Okay.
days in '65 it was very difficult to get
Could you
UK
have though?
imports.
Could you have gotten a UK import in the '60s?
Yeah, probably if I had gone into Greenwich Village, and there were some stores there, you know,
Hmm.
the House of Oldies, Village
Oh yeah.
Oldies, places like that,
Yep.
and a couple of others that I'm not thinking of the names of. The I probably, but I would have had to pay what was in that time would have had to pay through the nose for it.
Yeah.
You
Right.
probably would have had an easier time importing the British album in Canada, because by
Yes.
by like late '65, or mid '65, um, I know that off the top of my head because I've been working with a fellow Canadian on a project.
Hmm.
Um, you could get albums like, off the top of my head, The Beatles' Greatest from Germany.
Yeah.
That
Hmm.
was imported through capital of Canada. And
Hmm.
I think most of the British releases you could find in some capacity in Canada by '65, '66.
Hmm.
Hmm.
That would have been a hell of a
Okay.
lot easier. Yeah.
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 Mm. Yeah, you just touched upon it, Ethan, and I want to bring it up. Nowhere Man. For me, I think is one of John's strongest strongest songs. I've always loved it, and I love it in Yellow Submarine as well. So for if I'm you, Al, and then I hear later on, a few years later, I hear Rubber Soul and I hear Nowhere Man. I'm going to myself, wow, what a track. But then you would have already heard it on later, but putting it on the album, it gives the album a completely different feel than what you're used to, I'm sure.
Right. And I had only heard it again probably the one time, but it made
Mm,
such an impression on me with that first listen that when the single came out in February, I couldn't get enough of it. In fact, when people, I don't really go in for, frankly, I don't really go in for the ranking stuff that
Right.
that you guys do. That you guys do. So when people ask me, like, what are my, what's my favorite Beatles songs? Usually I just say, well, it with no alphabet, in no order, that Nowhere Man is always in the top five. It's I,
Oh,
you know,
very cool.
it's such a great song. It's,
Yeah.
Right. And
He's not
and I'm
lying.
yeah.
If memory serves me
Right.
correct, when I had Al on my show, Fans on the Run, you can find
yes,
it streaming. Um,
right.
Mm.
I think you picked Nowhere Man as
Yeah,
your
I
favorite
think
Very
Beatle
cool.
I
track.
was. Yeah, well, it was definitely. I think I gave you like five,
Yeah,
and said that in no particular order, but that's always in there, no question about it.
Right. Yeah, like you, Al. I mean, I'm with the UK one. I mean, that's the one that's in my brain. That's the one I can't forget the track listing. I mean, it's there. I mean, I know what's coming after You Won't See Me. I know
Right.
Run for Your Life. I mean, it's just for me, it's more powerful album because of tracks like Nowhere Man being on there, and if I needed someone too, I think is a really strong George track. I think is one of his better songs,
Hmm.
up to that time. And what goes on is okay, but I like the energy of Drive My Car as well. And I mean it's a fun one to see him do live as well. But for me, I gotta go with the UK copy of or version of Rubber Soul. So, but I mean, everybody watching, let us know in the comment section which one do you prefer? I mean, but go ahead,
Well,
Andy.
I was going to say, "Nowhere Man" is the one song for me that puts the UK over the US for me now, because
Right,
you just can't. It's that's the song that puts it over the edge. You got Nowhere Man. You Won't See Me in Nowhere Man back to back. I mean, come on.
right,
That is like that. I mean, it's a home run, and that's and Al.
right,
I could see why. I could see easily why Al chose it as one of his favorite songs, because it is. It's used in Yellow
Yeah.
Submarine.
yeah,
It's John introspective. Kind of more along the line of that kind of self-reflection, help, Nowhere Man, that all that kind of stuff is still continuing in his songwriting at this stage, and it's performed
mm,
just awesomely. Not so much live in Munich, but they did it nonetheless.
yeah,
Yeah, but
yeah.
and then that the when you mentioned Yellow Submarine, the version, the remixed version that's on the Yellow Submarine soundtrack,
Oh,
song track,
Mm,
is
right,
wonderful.
that was
Oh,
hearing that remix in '99
yes.
was pretty like that was the first time. That was way before all this new stuff. Now with
Yeah.
that was
right,
a big deal back then.
I don't think it's a controversial opinion among Beatle fans that in terms of remixes of Beatle songs, if there's say a Giles Martin remix of a song, but that song was also on Yellow Submarine soundtrack, most people would go to the Yellow Submarine songtrack remix
Hands
because
I think
down.
so.
I don't know why, it just sounds more Beatle-y,
Yeah.
sounds less
Yes.
artificial.
Yeah.
yeah.
Very much
Can
so.
I just say
Um,
something real quick about the Well, Tom, you were going to continue about Nowhere Man
no, no,
before
go ahead.
this is
No, no,
something
go ahead.
different.
Go,
It's
go.
unrelated, but can I just say one of the coolest things, and I'm sure Al, as a first gen, can appreciate this. But I remember as a kid looking at the cover, and I thought it was so cool to look at the
Right,
back and get the breakdown of who is doing what. John
Hmm.
with Paul, John and Paul, John. Like that was the first time on a Beatle record I
right,
think that you saw, John, Paul on piano, George Martin on harmonium, like some really cool detail, because liner notes, as we know, were kind of not a real big thing back then. You got a
No.
sleeve note if you were lucky, but to see that kind of detail, even in its barest form, was like so like because again, it was such an event to hold the record and study every single note. You know, even the liner that the record came in. What other records were being promoted? You know.
Well, it's funny you mentioned it because I'm just looking at the back, and we're gonna have a guest later on this month. Who now that I see this, I can't wait to So
Yeah.
you go into "You Won't See Me," and then it says Organ Evans on Hammond, and that's on the U.S. But then on the U.K., you see Mel Organ Evans on Hammond.
Yeah.
So that's pretty interesting.
So little
Pretty
little
interesting.
things like that. Ethan, Ethan
Right.
is such a knowledge of all the different variations.
Yeah.
Tell
Well,
us all
I
about.
also have to chime
Yeah,
in, not
please.
just as a record nerd, but as a graphic designer.
Yeah.
I, in some ways, actually no, in every way, I think the back cover of the UK Rubber Soul is better.
Mm.
Even though it's not too different. I mean, I think the photos are all in the same order. The US one looks a little kind of blown out, a little dark. But I really am not a fan of this big kind of bold Egyptian type face
No.
No.
saying the Beatles. I much prefer the kind of subdued UK.
Yeah.
Right.
But that's kind of that
Well,
was the order of the day.
let's jump in
The
there for 1 second. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Ethan. Go ahead.
the US capital graphic designers are not remembered for their subtlety.
Yeah,
Mm.
very true. And I got to chime in about the front cover.
Yeah,
Yeah.
please. I was just going to ask you about it. I was just
because
going to ask you.
because I can, if I'm not mistaken, that was probably one of the first occasions where a new album by a major band or a major artist
Right.
had no reference to the name of the
Yep.
artist on the cover. Plus that
Hmm.
that very ingenious. Oh boy, is it Robert Freeman?
Robert
Robert
Freeman.
Freeman.
Yeah.
A
His
mistake.
his photo, and I mean that's just because when I mentioned earlier about going into the store in Hackensack and seeing the album, and I mean it would just hit me right in the face.
And it was a happy mistake. I
Yeah.
love that story
Yes.
in the anthology
It
with
was-
Paul, where it was
It was the
flat.
epitome of
And
a
Yeah.
Can
Can we have
Yeah.
that? Yeah.
just the projection on the album slick and then it slid down.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
I love that.
Graphic design geek question for you, sir.
Yes.
Why does the American Rubber Soul have the brownish tint and then the UK one has the more orangey one?
I have no clue.
I thought you would know.
See, I'm not sure if it was like they ran it through focus groups or if it was some designer at Capitol. It's like, you know what? I'm a big fan of poop brown. Yeah.
These are the major geek questions here, ladies and gentlemen.
I don't think the kind of greenish brown works as good as the bold kind of burnt orange.
What's your here's a question we haven't asked yet. What's your all go-to preferred version, mono or stereo?
Al?
Boy, because I didn't get my first stereo until about 1970. So I was listening to all those albums in mono, including Sgt. Pepper. But once I did finally get the stereo and listen to it, that's an album that that's one that you should listen to in stereo.
Yeah, I agree. Though I do like listening to the mono. I mean, as I'm enjoying when I every once in a while I'll grab one of the mono CDs and throw it in the car. I have no problem with them. I just think the stereo just has a little bit more oomph to them. And I just like the the separation and they just But go ahead, Andy.
Well, I wanted to hear Ethan's answer, and then I'll chime back in.
Well, technically, there's also, when you're talking about mono and stereo, there's a secret third option that kind of only the nerds are aware of, and that's when the Beatles were coming to CD in '87. George Martin remixed
Yeah.
both
Oh,
Help and Rubber Soul.
yes,
And
Yeah.
so there's
that's
slightly
right.
different stereo mixes. And
Hmm.
the proper one only actually came out in Canada by accident because the CD or EMI Canada provided the wrong tapes to the pressing plants. So the true 1965 stereo mix are on some of the early Canadian Rubber Soul CDs. And the original mixes didn't really come out proper till 2009 when they were the bonus at the end of the mono CDs.
Right. I do remember that.
Okay.
What I was going to say
I
about. Go ahead, Ethan.
Okay. Oh, actually, no. You go ahead.
Tom was talking about the mono, and he just feels like the stereo has more
Yeah.
umph. You've got to remember that, the mono recordings, and I'm listen, I wasn't alive for this, but Al can attest to it. These, when it was mono, they were being made to be played on transistor radios, with kids listening to on the beach, through one little small portable speaker. So the mono would have packed a more punch. If a family had a hi-fi stereo and growing up in the '60s, where it was the one speaker, the one of those big furniture cabinet records, you're gonna hear the mono. It's gonna have a little bit more of a punch because it's only coming through one speaker, a smaller one. So especially back in the '60s, when it was not, even your car stereos now are 5.1 and great. So I could see why you want a stereo sounds better now than a mono on a modern system. Is that fair to say, Al?
Absolutely. That's why Phil Spector mixed all of his records, as if they would be heard. And I think they did this in Motown as well, with the perspective of their being listened to on a little 3-inch speaker, or in a speaker in a car radio or whatever. As far as I'm concerned, an album like Meet the Beatles should absolutely be listened to only in mono.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I would kind of like to throw in another little anecdote from the time. The mono. It's funny you bring up the mono having more punch because when the album first came out, if you were living in England and you bought the mono record, it almost had too much punch. And so the first run on Parlophone, they're what's called the loud cut, and so everything was just a bit hotter and louder, and I think it was causing people in their cheap little record players that they were meant to be played on, the needle kept jumping,
Right.
and so
Yeah,
they had
That's
to.
true.
that's
But
interesting to think about that because I would have never thought about the one speaker thing, Andy, and Al talking about that thing, talking about the mono thing. I mean,
That's why. That's why a
Yeah.
lot of purists will say that's how they heard it. That's how they exposed it. You're listening to a 2009 mono on a 5.1 surround system. You're gonna go, this is okay, but give me the stereo. So it's all
Well,
with the technology at the time.
see,
Yeah.
when it comes to mono and stereo for me, I tend to for Rubber Soul, I tend to go for the mono because some of the stereo mixes on Rubber Soul are quite good. However, some of them are really bad in my opinion. It's like, there's
Yeah.
tambourine and, hand
Yeah.
claps in one ear and then everything else in the other ear.
Yeah.
And it's incredibly off balance that
Okay.
nothing was centered properly.
Okay.
But that's why they're
Hey,
going
well,
back
Giles
and
will fix
remixing
that
them.
because in December we're gonna get a new one.
Let's
let's
hope.
end with this. Yeah, let's end with this. Al, just because these two albums are so unique, if let's say we do get a Rubber Soul box set by the end of the year, should they also include the U.S. In the version in this set?
Well, as Ethan was just saying, there are all these different mixes, and
Right.
so I would say so. Yeah, I don't know if we'll get it, but I would say, probably, yeah, the U.S. mono and the U.S. stereo, and the U.K. at least I guess the official UK mono and stereo.
Well, I could see the US stuff being included for any songs that had unique mixes
I
when
wonder if
the
they're going to
album came out.
include George's 1987 mixes too. I would hope they would include those.
I don't think they would do
Yeah.
the full US Rubber Soul, but I could see them doing whatever tracks had different unique mixes at the time, and then the tracks that were on the US Rubber Soul that weren't on the UK. I could see that.
All right,
And
well,
I also didn't say whether I prefer the US or the UK.
Oh, well, drum roll, please.
Shocker. The British I prefer, because while the American Rubber Soul is a great listen, it's I feel like it's kind of great in spite of itself, because the circumstances were kind of less than ideal of all the Capitol albums kind of cannibalizing each other and taking bits from that, and bits left over go to that. I feel like if you're listening to the UK trio of Help, Rubber Soul, and Revolver, you're getting a better listening experience, because all the tracks are where they're supposed to be.
I can see that.
Okay.
Sure.
All right, cool.
So,
well,
is it a clean
go
sweep for 4-0 UK now? Are we all going for?
I still.
Al and I are like. Al and I are like.
Made a commitment.
Yeah.
It's okay, Al. If you want to go US, it's okay. It's okay.
No, in lieu of the Super Rubber Soul playlist, I'll go with the because I probably have over the years, especially once it became available as an import, I probably have listened to the UK one, if only because Nowhere Man's on it.
There you go.
Right.
I bet you Glenn or Giles Martin is listening to this right now, hearing about Owl's Super Rubber Soul, and just frantically taking notes.
Yeah.
Very good. I love it.
Super Rubber
Soul. It's up to you out there. Let us know in the comment section. UK, US. If you're in the UK and you didn't hear the US until later on, I want to know your thoughts on the US and vice versa. If you're still stuck on the UK and you're listening and you want to, I'm sorry, US. If you're still stuck on the US here in the US, give us your thoughts. Why do you like the US version better than the UK? We would love to hear your thoughts. Al, I know you're a busy man. I know you're working on books. I know you're working on Beatlefan. I mean, talk about what you're doing these days.
Well, let's see. The new. In fact, I just finished, literally minutes ago. I finished a piece on actually the 45th anniversary of the Rutles, because a couple of weeks back was the 45th anniversary of the All You Need Is Cash TV special. So I do kind of like a history type of piece on the Rutles. That'll be in the next Beatlefan, and the new issue is out as well. Also, I just finished 2 chapters for Bruce Spizer's next Beatles album series book, which will be on the Please Please Me and with the Beatles albums, and I've also got 2 chapters in the Rubber Soul Revolver book.
Right.
As well, cool. and doing other stuff to keep myself out of trouble.
Very. Will you be at the Chicago Fest this year?
Yes. Yeah, I will be at Chicago, and I'm sure Ethan will be there. And are just one of you or both?
Well, yeah,
that's to be determined.
Probably just one.
It's probably to determine, because I don't want to go into why I'm not going, but I'll be doing something, or my wife and I will be doing something that will prevent me from going anyways. So, but Ethan, what do you got going on, my friend?
Well, I'm kind of in between things because, as it is apparent, I'm young. I'm in college. I just finished my semester. I'm
Yeah.
kind of trying to figure out what I want to do, for the next few months going forward with the show. I am working on some projects, that I don't really. I'm not sure I'm allowed to share too much about so far,
Yeah.
but I'm working on some cool stuff with a really cool guy, and stay tuned.
Very good, very good. Well, look forward to any more episodes of Fan on the Run if you choose to do more. So,
Beware.
Oh
yeah,
boy, what's
very
coming?
good. Yeah, Andy, you have been incredibly busy the last week, and just want to say congratulations to you because you, my friend, you took down the cocky Dylan Seavey, who was getting a little too, his ego was getting a little too big there, for winning 1 week in at the Ken Michaels trivia show. But you showed him who was the boss, and congratulations.
Mere bag of shells. Come on, I could do it in
Yeah.
my sleep.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was fun. Thank you, but thank you, Tom.
Don't
Yeah,
worry, Dylan. We still love you.
we do.
yeah. Exactly. So, but go over to Ken Michaels Radio YouTube channel, and you can see you see that, and then plus, I mean, have you guys scheduled the next episode?
Not yet, but it's probably in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, fair enough. And then you've also had a lot of yes content on your other leg YouTube channel.
My own show, my own podcast. Yeah, the other leg. I went to two John Anderson concerts recently with the Band Geeks, and he was doing all the classic Yes material, and it was phenomenal. And then, kind of after all that show, I kind of met up with the drummer of tribute band. Who I interviewed him, Joe Cass. But the one I recently just did and posted, what I'm really proud of, was an interview with a podcaster and author, Kevin Mulrine. And Kevin wrote a book, one whole book on the 1978 album Tormato, believe it or not, which is really surprising. And I interviewed him for about an hour on Sunday, and it's up on my channel. And he's got a book coming out all about the album, recording details, instruments, gear, and stuff like that. So it's doing very well, and he's promoted it. And I'm really proud that I was able to get Kevin to do that. So yeah, I like doing all the outside Beatles and Paul stuff on that channel, Dylan, Who, Genesis, all that stuff on that, and that's what I've been up to.
Al, did you ever tip your toe into the prog rock scene growing up?
Oh, sure. Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. Because back in the in the early '70s, when a station like WNEW-FM in New York was free form, a lot of the not jocks but the air personalities would play a lot of like the Yes album plus and Close to the Edge albums like that. Plus I was working in retail in those days.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, so I had to be, somewhat, at least somewhat up on prog rock.
Yeah. It's
I didn't.
it's a yeah. Not big into it, but you were aware of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
very cool. For my other show, Talk More Talk, we just did our latest episode last week, and that was on the 50th anniversary for Red Rose Speedway. That was a lot of fun talking about that. Coming up, I believe on the 15th, we've got a special show that we've been wanting to do for a while now, and it's pretty much the sum greater than the parts. And we're going to have an interesting conversation on, do the parts kind of live up to the sum? Is there any tracks that we feel that are equal to the sum? So it'll be interesting to hear everybody's thoughts on that. And then later on down the line, we'll be doing a 50th anniversary to Living in the Material World, which we all know is Ken Michaels' favorite album of all time. So that should be that should be interesting as well. So again, don't forget, Andy talked about the buttons earlier. You guys can email us about shirt as well, because we'll get in an order for that as soon as we get some more orders coming in. For that, email us at twolegspodcast@gmail.com. Find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook at Two Legs Podcast. Please check out our YouTube channel. If you're listening to the audio version of this, check out our YouTube channel. Please subscribe, as we're trying to get to 2K subscribers by the end of the year. And yes, we will have a giveaway when that happens. So Andy, Ethan, Al, I'm Tom. It was great hanging out with you guys talking about these two albums, and I cannot wait to hear all of your thoughts in the comment section, everybody. So as always, have a great day and a beautiful night. Take care, everyone.
Listening to Two Legs, a Paul McCartney podcast, hosted by Tom Hunyadi and Andy Nichols, with musical contributions by Dylan C.